Have you ever made a promise to yourself only to watch it quietly break again and again? What if I told you that the key to never failing yourself again isn't just about willpower or even vocabulary? Hello, I'm Maria, and right here beside me is John.
Hey everyone! We're so thrilled to have you here at Speak Unstoppable, where English isn't just learned, it's lived.
That's right. Here, we don't just focus on grammar or vocabulary, we focus on building the kind of confidence and habits that make never ever again more than a phrase, it becomes your law. And right now, we're going to take you on a journey that proves how one vow can completely transform your English, your mindset, and even your life. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because your journey to unstoppable English starts with one small action. And today, you're taking it. Have you ever looked at your reflection and realized you are trapped in a loop of your own making? Today, we stop the cycle. We aren't just making a promise, we are re-engineering your reality so that never ever again isn't just a wish, it's your new law. Imagine the weight of those words, never ever again. In English, this is one of the most definitive phrases a human being can utter. It is a linguistic boundary. But why is it that for millions of English learners and high achievers globally, this phrase often becomes a symbol of temporary guilt rather than permanent transformation? To understand this, we need to dive deep into the mechanics of human behavior and the subtle art of linguistic commitment. Dialogue dynamics. Let's talk about how this plays out in real life.
Maria, I've said it 1,000 times. I will never procrastinate on my fluency again. I will never skip my vocabulary drills again. Yet, here I am, 2 weeks later, and I haven't opened a single book. The phrase, never ever again, feels like a lie I tell myself to feel better in the moment.
That's because you're using it as a shield, John, not as a sword. When you say never ever again after a failure, you are reacting to the pain of the mistake. But pain is fleeting. Once the pain subsides, your brain defaults back to the path of least resistance. You aren't fighting your laziness, you're fighting your neurology.
So, you're saying my brain is wired to make me break my own promises? That's a frustrating thought. How am I supposed to teach my global audience to be consistent if I can't even master my own habits?
By changing the dialogue. Don't just focus on the never, focus on the why. Let's look at the story of a student named Elias. His journey is the perfect blueprint for what we are discussing today. The story of Elias, the shadow of next time. Elias was a brilliant young professional living in a bustling international hub. His English was good enough to get by, but he had a glass ceiling. Every time a major promotion came up that required public speaking in English, he retreated. He would tell himself, "I'm not ready yet. Next time." And after every missed opportunity, he would sit in his dark apartment, gripped by a cold sense of regret, and whisper, "Never ever again. Next time, I will be the one on that stage." But next time is the most dangerous phrase in the English language. It provides an escape hatch for the ego. Elias spent 3 years in this cycle. He bought expensive courses he never finished and downloaded apps he never opened. He was addicted to the feeling of starting, but he was terrified of the process of becoming. The turning point for Elias didn't come from a textbook. It came from a moment of pure, unadulterated frustration. He was at a global conference, sitting in the back row, watching a colleague, who was arguably less experienced than him, deliver a keynote speech in fluent, confident English. The sting wasn't just jealousy. It was the realization that his never ever again had become a hollow ritual. Deep analysis, the vocabulary of regret. In English, we often confuse regret with repentance. Regret is a feeling. It is passive. Repentance is an action. It is active. When you tell your audience, never, ever again, you are asking them to move from the passive state of feeling sorry to the active state of structural change. Elias realized that his brain was treating his English studies as a threat to his comfort. To break the cycle, he had to stop making grand 900-word manifestos to himself and start creating micro-boundaries. Instead of saying, "I will never miss a study session," he said, "I will never go to sleep without learning 3 new phrasal verbs." He shifted the scale from the infinite to the immediate.
So, Maria, what you're saying is that Elias succeeded because he lowered the stakes?
No, he raised the stakes of the present moment while lowering the barrier to entry. He made the now more important than the ever. Most people fail because they are trying to fix their whole future with one sentence. You can't fix a year of mistakes with one never ever again. You can only fix the next 10 minutes. This is the fundamental lesson for anyone watching this who feels stuck. Whether you are learning English to move abroad, to get a better job, or to simply express your soul to the world, you must realize that your never ever again is only as strong as your right now. Elias began to treat his English not as a subject, but as a skin he was growing into. He stopped viewing mistakes as evidence of his inadequacy and started viewing them as data points. When he tripped over a conjugation, he didn't spiral into self-loathing. He simply noted it, corrected it, and moved on. The never ever again wasn't about the mistake. It was about the reaction to the mistake. He promised himself, "I will never ever again let a mistake stop my momentum." That is the shift. That is the breakthrough. It is the transition from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, wrapped in the powerful linguistic cloak of a definitive vow. Building upon the breakthrough Elias experienced, we have to look deeper into the linguistic traps that catch even the most dedicated learners. Transitioning from the emotional breaking point to the actual rebuilding phase requires a shift in the very vocabulary we use to describe our failures. The dialogue of resistance.
I see what Elias did. He shifted his focus. But, Maria, let's be honest. For most of my students, the problem isn't just a lack of willpower. It's that the English language itself feels like a mountain that grows taller every time they try to climb it. When they say never ever again, they are usually saying it after they've fallen off the mountain. How do you keep climbing when the oxygen is thin?
That's a vivid metaphor, Joun. But here's the cold truth. Most people aren't falling off the mountain, they are jumping off because they caught a glimpse of how high the peak really is. They use never ever again as a way to punish themselves for being human. If you use language to beat yourself up, you'll eventually stop wanting to use that language at all.
So, if never ever again is often used as a punishment, how do we turn it into a tool for empowerment? I want my audience to feel like they are gaining something, not just losing a bad habit.
You do that by identifying the linguistic relapse. Think about it. When Elias was struggling, he wasn't just failing to study, he was telling himself a story in his head. He was using words like always, never, and impossible. These are absolute terms. We need to replace the absolute of failure with the absolute of action. After Elias made his vow, he entered what we call the middle passage. This is the period after the initial excitement of a new resolution has faded, but before the results are visible. This is where 90% of people break their never ever again promise. Elias found himself at a dinner party with native English speakers. 2 months into his new regime, he felt confident. But then, someone asked him a complex question about international economics. Elias froze. His mind went blank. He stumbled over his words, mixed up his tenses, and eventually just nodded and walked away to the drinks table. The old Elias would have gone home and said, "See, I'll never be able to do this. Never ever again will I put myself in a position to be embarrassed like that." He would have used the phrase to shrink his world. But the new Elias, the one who understood the architecture of change, did something different. He stood by the drinks table, took a deep breath, and whispered to himself, "I will never, ever again let a moment of silence define my intelligence. I missed that word, but I will not miss the next opportunity to speak." He stayed at the party. He went back into the circle. He didn't speak perfectly, but he spoke persistently. In the English learning community, we often hear the term fluency. But fluency is a trap if you don't define it. For Elias, never ever again became a boundary against his own perfectionism.
Wait, Maria, are you saying that to succeed, he had to accept being imperfect?
Exactly. In English, we have a saying, "Perfect is the enemy of good." When you say, "Never ever again will I make a mistake," you are setting yourself up for an inevitable crash. But when you say, "Never ever again will I let a mistake stop my progress," you become invincible. One is a cage, the other is a runway.
I think my audience needs to hear that. They feel so much shame when they forget a word or use the wrong preposition. That shame is what breaks the never promise.
Shame is a low-energy emotion, John. It doesn't have the fuel to sustain a long-term journey. We need to replace shame with curiosity. Instead of Elias saying, "I am stupid for forgetting that word," he started saying, "That's an interesting gap in my knowledge. Let me fill it." For a global audience, the phrase "never ever again" carries different cultural weights, but the biological response is the same. Whether you are in Tokyo, Brazil, or Riyadh, your brain's prefrontal cortex is fighting against the amygdala, the part of the brain that wants to keep you safe and hidden. Elias began to study the way successful people spoke. He noticed that they didn't have a secret vocabulary. What they had was a never ever again attitude toward giving up. He realized that the most successful English speakers aren't the ones with the best grammar, they are the ones who refuse to be silenced by their own errors. This leads us to a critical concept in English mastery, the compounding effect of vows. When you break a promise to yourself, you don't just lose that day's progress, you lose a piece of your self-trust. Elias knew this. Every time he felt the urge to skip his 3 phrasal verbs, he reminded himself that he wasn't just learning words, he was building a reputation with himself. He was proving to the man in the mirror that his word was law.
So the never isn't about the English. It's about the character.
Now you're getting it. English is just the medium. The transformation is in the person. Elias wasn't just becoming a better English speaker, he was becoming a man who kept his word. And that, John, is a global language that everyone understands. As we move forward, we must ask ourselves, are we using our never ever again to build a wall around our comfort zone? Or are we using it to burn the bridges that lead back to our old, mediocre selves? Elias chose to burn the bridges. He chose the discomfort of growth over the safety of the shadows. As Elias moved further into his journey, he realized that willpower was a finite resource. You can say never ever again with all the passion in the world, but if your environment stays the same, your old habits will eventually come knocking at your door. This is where the battle moves from the mind to the world around us.
Maria, I've been thinking about Elias. He's got the mindset now, but what happens when he goes back to his old routine? I see this with my students all the time. They get motivated by a video, they make a vow, but then they go back to their friends who don't speak English, or they open their phones and everything is in their native language. The never starts to fade.
That's because they are trying to be heroes in a world designed to make them failures, John. If you want to say never ever again to your old self, you have to stop living in that person's house. You have to redesign your environment so that success is the path of least resistance.
Redesign the environment? You mean move to London or New York? That's not possible for everyone.
Not at all. I'm talking about the digital and social environment. Elias didn't move cities, he moved his digital borders. He realized that if his phone was set to his native language, he was constantly being pulled back into his comfort zone. He made a vow. Never, ever again will I consume mindless content in my native tongue during my growth hours. Elias looked at his life like a scientist. He realized that his relapses into laziness happened at specific times and in specific places. Usually, it was 8 p.m. on his sofa with his phone in his hand. The sofa was his danger zone. So, Elias made a radical change. He decided that the sofa was no longer for scrolling. He created a growth corner, a simple chair, a lamp, and his English journals. He told himself, "In this chair, I am a global citizen. In this chair, I am a fluent speaker." He leveraged a psychological concept called context-dependent memory. By changing his physical space, he made it easier for his brain to access his English-speaking persona. But the biggest challenge wasn't the furniture, it was the people. Elias had a group of friends who loved to complain. Every weekend, they would meet and talk about how hard life was and how impossible it was to get ahead. Elias realized that every time he left them, his never ever again felt weaker. Their skepticism was contagious.
Wait, are you saying he had to leave his friends? That sounds harsh, Maria. People need a social life.
It's not about leaving people, it's about renegotiating your time. Elias didn't cut them off entirely, but he made a new rule. Never, ever again will I allow someone else's limiting beliefs to enter my sanctuary. He started spending more time in online English-speaking forums, surrounding himself with people who were also saying, never, ever again to mediocrity.
So he traded the comfort of old friends for the challenge of new peers. That takes a lot of courage. It's like learning a new language also requires learning a new way to live.
Precisely. If you want to speak like a leader, you can't spend all your time listening to victims. Elias understood that his English wasn't just about grammar, it was about the energy behind the words. You can't speak a language of opportunity with a mindset of scarcity. Elias began to Englishize his entire life. He followed the never ever again rule with his entertainment. No more subtitles in his native language. If he didn't understand a movie, he watched it again, and again, and again. He turned his frustration into a game. He started talking to himself in English while doing chores. I am making coffee now. I am planning my day. It sounds simple, even silly, but he was closing the gap between his thoughts and his speech. He was proving to his subconscious that English wasn't a foreign entity anymore. It was the primary operating system of his life. In English, the word no is a complete sentence. Elias learned to use it. Do you want to go to the party and stay up late? No, never ever again will I sacrifice my morning study for a night of regret.
I love that. The hard no is actually a yes to your future. I think our global audience needs to realize that never ever again isn't a negative phrase. It's an incredibly positive one because it clears the weeds so the flowers can grow.
Exactly, Joan. Elias wasn't losing a party, he was gaining a career. He wasn't losing his native culture, he was gaining the world. By setting these boundaries, his English fluency didn't just improve, it exploded. Because he wasn't just studying English for an hour a day, he was living in English 24 hours a day. This is the secret that the elite learners won't tell you. It's not about the best app or the perfect teacher. It's about the environment you build around your vow. If your environment is a graveyard of old habits, your never ever again will be buried there. But if you build a fortress of focus, your vow becomes an unbreakable law. Elias was no longer the man in the back row. He was becoming the man who would soon stand on the stage. He had mastered his mind, he had mastered his vocabulary, and now he had mastered his world. The never ever again was no longer a struggle. It was his identity. The final stage of transformation isn't about the absence of fear. It is about the presence of a commitment so strong that fear becomes irrelevant. As Elias reached the pinnacle of his journey, he had to face the ultimate test of his never ever again vow, the transition from the practice room to the public stage.
Maria, we've followed Elias through the mental shifts and the environmental changes. But there's a moment every English learner dreads. The moment when you can no longer hide. The moment when the world is watching and you have to prove that your never ever again wasn't just talk. How does he handle the pressure?
Pressure is what turns coal into diamonds, John. Elias spent months building his fortress. Now he has to step outside of it. The beauty of a never ever again commitment is that it removes the option of retreat. When you burn the boats, you either take the island or you perish. Elias chose to take the island.
But what if he stutters? What if his accent makes people whisper? The global audience knows this feeling, the imposter syndrome that tells you that you don't belong in the room with native speakers.
Imposter syndrome is just a ghost from the past, John. Elias learned that the only way to kill a ghost is to walk straight through it. He realized that never ever again meant he would never again allow his accent to be a source of shame. Instead, he saw it as a badge of honor, a sign that he speaks more than one language and has the courage to grow. The day finally arrived. It was the same international conference where, a year earlier, Elias had hidden in the back row, swallowed by regret. This time, his name was on the program. He was the guest speaker for the closing session. As he stood behind the heavy velvet curtains, his heart was a drum in his chest. His palms were damp. For a split second, the old Elias whispered, "You can still run. Tell them you're sick. You'll never be good enough." But then he remembered his vow. He remembered the cold nights in his growth corner. He remembered the phrase that had become his heartbeat. Never ever again, living in regret. He realized that the pain of standing on that stage was nothing compared to the pain of going back to the man he used to be. The moderator announced his name. Elias stepped into the light. He didn't start with a joke or a standard greeting. He looked at the audience, hundreds of people from every corner of the globe, and he spoke with a voice that carried the weight of his journey. He made mistakes. He tripped over a complex sentence in the third minute. But instead of freezing, he smiled, corrected himself, and kept going. He wasn't performing, he was communicating. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then the room erupted. It wasn't because his English was perfect, it was because his passion was undeniable. He had bridged the gap between cultures using the very tool he once feared.
He did it, Maria. He actually did it. But the most important part isn't the applause, is it?
No, John. The most important part happened after he walked off the stage. A young man approached him, looking just as nervous as Elias used to look. The young man said, "I want to speak like you, but I'm too afraid." And Elias looked him in the eye and said, "Promise yourself, never ever again will you let fear decide your future."
So the cycle of growth continues. Elias didn't just change his own life, he became a lighthouse for others. This is what I want for our audience. I want them to realize that their struggle with English is actually their training ground for leadership.
Exactly. Never ever again is the language of leaders. It is the language of people who decide that the past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. Whether you are learning English to lead a company, to travel the world, or to teach others, your vow is the foundation of your new world. To everyone watching this, your journey is not just about words, grammar, or syntax. It is about the boundaries you set for your soul. When you say, "never ever again" to your excuses, you are opening a door to a version of yourself you haven't even met yet. Elias is no longer a character in a story. He is a mirror. Look into that mirror. Are you tired of the next times? Are you done with the "I'm not ready yet"? The English language is not your enemy. It is your vehicle. But a vehicle is useless if the driver is paralyzed by the fear of a wrong turn. You will make wrong turns. You will stall the engine. But if you vow to never ever again let those moments stop your journey, you will eventually reach your destination.
Maria, I feel different. Even as we talk, I feel like my own never promises are getting stronger.
That's the power of truth, John. When you align your words with your actions, you become unstoppable. The world needs more people who keep their promises to themselves. As we close this chapter, remember this. The words "never ever again" are the most powerful English words you will ever learn, but only if you mean them. Don't say them to feel better today. Say them to change your life forever. Elias walked out of that conference center and into the cool evening air. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. His past was gone, burned away by the fire of a single, unbreakable commitment. He was finally free.